That's good.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for the work that you've done in Wild Ones and how you've supported the community of native plant gardeners and you've supported the community of plants and pollinators and other creatures seen and unseen. And I also wanted to give a special thanks to my collaborator here, my partner collaborator, Vicky, who actually did the lion's share of the work putting together this slide presentation. So really, if it wasn't for Vicky, uh, it wouldn't look as nice and tidy and balanced and aesthetic, and as our gardens wouldn't look as nice and tidy and balanced and inviting for pollinators and other creatures. So thanks to all of you and especially Vicky. So I was invited to talk about my art, and I wanted to specifically talk about mandalas in a garden. And Vicky and I have been talking for many years about garden art. So we're looking at expanding perspective, thinking about your garden aesthetically, which I'm sure all of you do, and specifically with creating sanctuary, not in this time of COVID, but really at any time in our lives. I think it's important, I think for all of us as native plant gardeners, we do consider the spiritual side of being out there in nature and creating that special place. And so this is the invitation that I want to open up with, is think about your garden as a sanctuary, as a place for healing and contemplation, as well as community and inviting these other creatures and beings in. So mandala means both circle and center. And here's probably the most basic mandala of all, a dot and a circle. But mandalas are also about wholeness and relationship of parts to the whole. So mandalas aren't always circular. Sometimes they could be crosses and other geometrical forms. After this presentation, I'm sure you'll be seeing mandalas everywhere. So mandalas are images that have been used throughout millennia for different reasons, for aesthetic reasons, as maps of inner and outer space, as architectural elements. And of course, artists, throughout time have used mandalas. And it does seem to have an organizing effect, an organizing and calming effect on the brain. It helps us to focus. So, it has a healing component. Here's some relatively famous mandalas. The one on the left is a Tibetan sand mandala that was okayed by the Dalai Lama to have it permanently installed, because typically mandalas in this form are created to represent the ephemeral nature of being. They may spend hours or even days, creating these elaborate sand mandalas, and then what happens is they take a broom and whisk it up and dump it into a flowing river. So honoring the tentativeness, the ephemeralness of life. And on the right is the famous rose window in, is that Notre Dame?
Yes.
And Vicky says Notre Dame. And here you can see mandalas of all types, of all expressions in nature, fruit, tree rings, these sea creatures, these urchins, weather patterns, movement, like when you drop a pebble into water. So mandalas are not necessarily only static representations, but they also make use of movement and time and organizations, whether animals and plants, humans. And of course, common to our hearts, we see them all throughout nature. And flowers are kind of like a classical example of mandalas. So here you see some from our garden, Vicky's photos. And you also see some of the pollinators. So how pollinators move around these plants is is in a mandala fashion, you know, circular, going from one flower to another. So it's both an object, and it's a movement, and it's an organization of community. And within the mandala, everything is welcomed. You know, the good, bad, the ugly, although I don't see things as ugly necessarily in nature, but everything is welcomed and contained within the mandala. So coming full circle, to use a mandala, I guess, pun, is how I got involved in mandala making. And at first, it was maybe 30 years ago, I was doing mandalas freehand. I was making kind of abstracted images, and there was a group of people that I was working with that where we were taking our abstracted images and putting them in the center of two mirrors at a right angle. And when you do that, it creates, visually, it creates a mandala. So I was very intrigued with that process, because things that Vicky is reminding me that I have to be sensitive to time. But within those abstracted images, you start seeing forms that organize. So fast forward maybe 30 years forward, and I was working at the wellness center and started playing around with the computer, and noticed that you know, the computer, even though I had resistance to it at the beginning, you can create these interesting art forms, including mandalas. So I started working with the computer. I started taking images from outside the computer, like snowflake, or how snowflakes form, and experiment with creating these mandalas. So the mandala on the left is not a photo, but it's the process of, it's similar to the process of how snowflakes form. And here's one of my earlier mandalas. This is remnant in one of Vicky's favorites, and it's remnant of a sea creature. This is one of the first ones that actually got some recognition. So mandalas, the mandalas that I work with are not necessarily restricted to images like photos and that, but this one comes from a sound file. And so you see this kind of like wave-like pattern in it. And so really any kind of information, whether it's photos or images or sounds or physiological data, as long as it's digital, can be transformed into these aesthetic representations, these mandalas. Here's the first commission that I did, and this is at the Penny George Institute for Health and Healing in Minneapolis on Chicago. This was a combination of photos from their center, of the providers that were working there, and also, you know, their statements, their mission statements about why they were interested in health and well-being. And this is 10 years, well, I guess it's maybe 20 years later, they approached me again. They have centers in Woodbury and Plymouth and other places, and they wanted to hire me to do more recent commissions. So this is one of the more recent ones, and you see me standing by it in Plymouth. Is that right, Vicki?
Yeah.
Plymouth. So you can see how it can be incorporated into spaces. This is a commission on the left of an image that I did for this couple, based on, I think, a photo of them in their space. So you see it has these feng shui elements, like it could complete something of your space. It could fill in a gap. And then on the right is a couple of these mandalas as tapestries in a business space, a chiropractic center in Northeast. And you see with the mandala is a circle in a center, but also the way that I work with these is a mandala, the circle can be stretched out. So the top and the bottom of these tapestries, which I call them, are really stretched out mandalas, the same aesthetic elements, but stretched out. So here's an example from the Wellness Center where Vicki and I spent a lot of our time, and some of the great people who work there. And to nature, this is an image from the fall foliage, falling foliage at Nearstrand, and we became intrigued with, how these mandalas could represent, aspects of nature, communities in nature, these aesthetic elements in nature. And so in conversations with Vicki, she was suggesting that we think of this as like, well, Could we offer garden art that would represent people taking aspects of their garden that they felt meaningful and then making art out of it? So these mandalas can be obviously used in different kinds of capacities. This is a holiday card we sent out a couple years ago, and this is from, of course, like winter foliage, evergreens and such. This is from a couple years ago, and this is based on a heliconia species from Costa Rica. We thought it had nice holiday colors in it. And this is from our yard, and this was a banner that hangs, well, it hung until the wind kind of did its number on it, but this is based on our garden. So a photo that Vicky took on the right of the monarch on Liatris, and I did the mandala thing with it. So the mandala circle in the middle and the mandala stretched out. And you might see, if you look closely at the top or the bottom, and there are these kind of like these beings that showed up. When the mandala process, it's not, I don't have a goal in mind. I just kind of experiment and see what emerges. Sometimes there's these creatures that emerge. Sometimes these different perspectives emerge. And there I am standing by it. You see that banner is maybe 5 foot by 2.5. It has a nice feng shui element because it's taking the place of a door or a window, and it's adding color and interest. And on the right are, you know, some of the creatures, the beings, and the flora and the fauna that we've used to incorporate and be inspired by this art. And this is a three-dimensional piece. This was a piece that was at the Arboretum that I was lucky enough to win a commission for, and it's a mandala three-dimensional piece. It's about 6 feet in diameter by 4 feet tall. It has 4 mandala gardens in it. Okay, and each of the mandala gardens, if you look at it, because of the mirrors at right angles, will create a mandala. And the mandala on the left is from the west side of that. So here's other examples of that. Here's it in the winter, and this is something recent on the right, an ice hut that you, so it's an idea like where you can be creative and playful with your mandalas. This is a mandala based on another image that Vicky took of the butterfly weed and a monarch. This is on metal. More images from the monarch and different plants like echinacea, another version. Yeah, durable. And this is a commission that I did for a friend of mine who lives in Arizona. And so she wanted a succulent theme, you know, that's more of the native plants, of course, in Arizona. And so you can see how those aesthetic elements from the succulents translated into the mandala image. And hopefully you will be seeing more mandalas. And the interesting and ironic thing is that how we see mandalas, and the organ that we see mandalas through, our eye, is a mandala. So mandalas can be very intimate. You know, they're everywhere. They're in our bodies. They're in nature. And here's one of the grandest mandalas of all. And I wanted to kind of end with this slide because to honor what you guys are doing as native plant gardeners is we are all in our small but significant ways making an effort to save the earth. And so my promotion is like, well, how can we, through our connection to nature and our aesthetic appreciation, our heart, our love for nature and its creatures and its beings, how can we interrelate and with nature in an aesthetic way and promote biodiversity? And I think Vicky often says is that you save what you love. Right. You save what you love, and I think art is a way of connecting to nature and expressing our love. So if anybody is interested, you know, we are very willing and interested to talk to you about how we could collaborate with you. I see mandala making as a collaboration between nature, between whoever we're working with, like you as individuals or your family, and myself. So it's a collaborative effort. So if anybody's interested in exploring that, we would be honored to work with you, to collaborate with you on that. So did I do my time thing?
You did it well.
Okay. All right. Feel free to reach out.
Excellent.